Welcome back to my channel, Famous and Fabulous. When Dan Blocker was on Bonanza, didn't spend much time with his family. That's what his son Durk says now. Sincerely, somewhat depressing and unexpectedly raw following after all these years. Most likely, you've seen Blocker as the large man, Hos Cartwright. Always with the larger heart. With a silly smile, galloping into peril and a steel-strength moral compass. However, beyond that kind grin was a man who hardly had time to catch their breath, let alone have dinner with his children. According to Durk, in the 1960s, they was unable to traverse a fairground or a ballpark with no people gathered around their father. Hos was more than a fictional figure. A national treasure, he was. Children desired. Adults wanted to shake his hand and give him a hug. Hand, and everybody desired only one, picture. Additionally, Dan handled it with elegance. He would posture, sign, smile, and maintain shifting. However, in regard to his own that, continual attention hurt. Kids. At one point he said, "If you could take your taking the family to Disneyland and having a good time, the rides without being surrounded by people, we were fortunate." For him, those times were uncommon. He was a resident of San Fernando Valley with Dolphia, his spouse, and their 4 children, 2 girls and 2 boys. Following as Bonanza gained popularity, they increased the home. A game room, additional bedrooms, even a swimming pool. However, even in that case, the outer world seemed to always find its way inside. Dan might have relocated to Beverly. The hills where all the other celebrities reside survived. As a result, the agents and producers instructed him to do so. The educational institutions, they stated they were better up there. However, Dan saw right through it. Better educational institutions, more costly educational institutions, and more wealthy parents. Dan wasn't interested in that. Life. If the Valley's schools are suitable for typical children, they're suitable for mine, he once said to R. Porter. He meant it. Blocker was 6'4" and weighed about 300 pounds. But he wasn't attempting to be more important than life. All he desired was to become a father, one who instilled moral values in his children and put them to bed by 8 o'clock. In a literal sense, Dolphia and Dan had a plan. If a child wasn't in bed by 8, so they left the Tar Club for a week in a row. That could seem absurd, yet it was successful. The children desired to fit in. They enjoyed the standard. Dolphia was allowed to be the enforcer. He was the teddy bear, the cuddly one. Bear. He even referred to their children as pretty. Nice crew. However, the problem is that when you're to the entire world, your Hos Cartwright children also see that. They observe you fighting off bandits on television. They see you tumble off horses, receive a shoulder gunshot wound, and like it's no big deal, wrestle adult males. Totham, regardless of how fictitious it is. It was only acting, Dan informed them. Yes. It wasn't real, he said. However, that didn't prevent his daughter from exploding into tears at an especially stressful scene. He was shot, only slightly hurt. Yet, she rushed over to examine his head and inquired if an aspirin was necessary. That shows strong the connection was. They failed to observe the performer. They saw their father. Additionally, that's the fans didn't see the part. They observed the hero, the cowboy, but not the man wondering if he was awake at night, missing his children's finest years' lives. In order to truly comprehend that, you must go back in time, to before Thuranch, back to Texas, before Hollywood. Dan was born in the tiny town of Dalb, hidden away in Bowie County. He was from modest beginnings. Shaq's parents, Aura Mary Arizona Blocker, operated a little supermarket in O'Donnell, Texas. Not the type of location it shouts future TV star. That, however, Dan was distinct. He was unique even as a child. He was literally always tall for his age. And when he reached maturity, he was enormous. 300 pounds, wide shoulders, the size of meal plates for hands. However, this is what people don't understand. He was moreover nice, gentle, and the type of man who could end a dispute without using force. his tone. He attended Texas Military Institute in 1940 before rebounding between Hardin-Simmons University and Teachers College at Sul Ross State. That's where he was able to settle in. Football as well as drama. Drama indeed. The same individual who once worked in a nasty bar as a bouncer, performing in plays as well. Where was Sue Ross? He earned a degree in acting and speech. That combination of strength and his dramatic prowess is what made him not to be forgotten. He couldn't be missed. Additionally, after he began speaking, you didn't wish to. However, life wasn't simple. Following Blocker, served in the US Army while in college throughout the Korean War. Furthermore, he wasn't merely peeling potatoes or filing papers. He was right in the middle of it, infantry boots in the mud, front line. He worked with F Company, 2nd, as a sergeant 179th Infantry Regiment Battalion. The man witnessed actual combat and was also injured. A Purple Heart was earned. Additionally, he racked up a lengthy medal list. Defense of the Nation Korean Service Medal, and 2 Bronze Stars, Infantry Combat Veteran Badge, among other things. He wasn't acting like a hero. In fact, he was one. When he turned from Korea, he did not go to Hollywood immediately. He began by teaching Sonora, Texas, drama and English later on, Carlsbad, New Mexico, California. Furthermore, he wasn't just some fill-in alternative. He was genuine. Teacher. Consider yourself in 6th grade, a teacher who plans to become a TV cowboy. That's how rooted he was. Not till it wasn't until 1958 that Dan decided to reel Los Angeles. He intended to possibly pursue additional graduate studies at UCLA. Hollywood, however, had different ideas. His first significant break, a silly part in A Outer Space, is a Three Stooges short Jitters. He was constructed to be Dawn Blocker and engaged in Space Goon play. Not glitzy, however, it created opportunities. After then, it snowballed. He arrived in Gunsmoke, Sheriff of Cochise, Colt, 45, The Zorro, and even Rifleman. Typically playing a bar bouncer or a tough person. Always strong, but silent. Will. In Havgun he played a thief, Travel. In Cimarron he played a recurrent part in City. Gradually people began to take notice. However, it not until 1959 did things change. Altered. And we come to a halt here, near the edge of the precipice, since Dan received the function that would characterize the remainder of his life. Something that would turn him into all well-known, a TV icon, and ultimately rip open his family's private sphere. However, prior to discussing casting and the actual events on the friendships, the Bonanza set, and the competitions, and Durk's secrets ultimately made the decision to share, we must go back in time to when Dan stepped dressed up and walked onto the stage. I came to the realization that nothing would ever be the same once more. It begins with one Hos Cartwright is his name. That's the part. The legacy is that NBC risks its money, own a family western, a new genre of western. Yes, they desire activity, but they also desire a heart. 3 sons and a father residing on Ponderosa's enormous ranch in Nevada. Every son was required to bring something exclusive to the table. As for Hos, they wanted a huge, lovable and robust person. Someone who could break up a fight in a bar using a bear embrace while still making children laugh, just by arching an eyebrow. Someone who appeared to be able to wrangle a horse, but if he saw a puppy hobbling, he would also cry. That person was Dan Blocker. He enters, despite being over 300 pounds, and 6'4", he's not shouty, not combative. He's composed, warm. He shakes hands firmly, yet the voice is quiet. That contrast is striking. The casting crew, like lightning, they've seen rough guys and sweet guys, but it's uncommon to have both in one. Hos is that. Suddenly, Dan gets the job. In the ensuing 13 years, he makes 415 appearances, making him one of the greatest numbers of any cast member. From 1959 to 1972, Bonanza becomes the second longest Western in history of NBC at the time. At its height, it attracts audiences in the tens of millions each week. Not everyone watches Hos, they await his arrival. They applaud when he appears. When he stumbles, they chuckle over what he said. They have faith in him. Now, you may not be aware of this. Dan wasn't a cowboy when playing Hos parody. He had a central idea and an old saying that stayed with him. Each and every when he first put on Hos's boots, he considered being kind and doing good as soon as you can. Since he once stated that we only went this way once, and viewers, especially children, felt that way. Dan received letters over the years, hundreds of them. One from a boy who just, "I wish you were my father," I said. That struck him firmly. It had nothing to do with fame. It had nothing to do with ratings. What it was about, Hos stood for. Love, loyalty, and safety. Dan never got rid of that letter. It produced every extended shoot. Every family missed dinner seems a bit more worthwhile now. However, despite the show's increasing viewership, Danover slows down. He works away from and Bonanza. He starred in Come in 1963, alongside Frank Sinatra, Blow Your Horn. Then again in Lady in Cement in 1968. When he portrays a tough guy, completely different from Hos, and it functions. He is frightening when he desires to be. Stanley Kubrick later is thinking about using him in Doctor Strange. I enjoy playing King Kong, Major TJ. That's the part that ultimately rides the atomic final scene bomb, but Dan never assumes the role. His agent declines, before he had a chance to read it at all. In the end, Slim Pickens does it, but film historians continue to ask, what if? Yes, Blocker had said. However, Dan isn't hurting for projects. He stars in 1968 in A Lonely Man's Something. He performs John Killebrew, a blacksmith who creates a brand new town. The fans adore the heartfelt story. Then, in 1970, he makes another, Change in Calico County's Cockeyed Cowboys. It's comedy this time. He portrays a timid, clumsy, charming bachelor, and the filled with legendary figures like Jim Bakis, Jack Elam, and Mickey Rooney. However, this is the aspect that truly takes folks by surprise. Not only is Dan Blocker acting, but he's establishing a brand. In 1963, he turns into a new restaurant chain's co-owner. Bonanza Steakhouse is the name. The hook. Dan appears in roles as Hos. He's on the advertisements. He attends openings. Indeed, he signs each menu, shakes each hand, and captures each image. The company expands quickly. People have faith in Hos. Additionally, if Hos claims that the steak is delicious, so you have faith in him, Dan doesn't do it either, by itself. His son Durk joins him in 1964 for the first time on film. It's a vehicle advertisement, a brief but significant moment, one for the family of Blockers. Later, Durk claims that it's among his earliest memories of his father's work. Nor the television, nor a commercial, but the ranch. Only the. They were both grinning and cooperating. The link was that strong. Right now, you may believe that success would go like that. To the head of a guy. Not Dan, though. He remains grounded. He maintains his modesty. He never loses sight of his origin. He produces on-set pals, including a young Robert Allman is the director. They struck it away. After several years, Allman desires Dan for the protracted farewell. He desires that he play Roger Wade. But before to the commencement of filming, a disaster occurs. Dan dies. Suddenly, Sterling takes on the role. Hayden. The movie's last cut is in honor of Dan Blocker. At this point, the last seasons of Bonanza are almost over. The audience is evolving. Television is shifting. However, Dan is still displaying up. Jokes are still being told in between takes, making time for each and every admirer, and continuing to return home each evening to the valley for his spouse and children. However, behind the steakhouse, the famous, the prosperity, the pressure begins to increase. Dan's health starts to become an issue. He's been rather throughout his life, and that burden is now catching up to him. He perseveres. it continues to function and smile. However, his closest friends and family begin to worry. Durk recalls those last few years, the lengthy shoots, the peaceful times spent at home, and those recollections will soon take the main stage. So, what was life actually like, preferring the blockers outside of the studio lights? And what ultimately caused the man to break fans believed it to be indestructible? Behind the Dan, Blocker lived with a smile and a cowboy hat, a life that is full of conviction, purpose, and his silent affection for his family. Off he wasn't a TV legend camera. He was a spouse, a parent, and a man with roots in principles. He wed Parker, Dolphia, that he met this woman at Sul Ross State University, and they collectively brought up Los Angeles 4 kids. They possessed Deborah and Dana Lynn, 2 daughters Lee, along with 2 kids, Durk and David, and each of them experienced the effects of Dan's massive presence. Blocker, David became a prosperous producer in Hollywood. He received an Emmy for producing in 1998, Don King, in America only. Durk pursued acting in the interim, continuing the name of the Blocker in front of the lens. However, as they grew up, they all understood what fancifully speculated on the amount of money Dan handed to his family, despite having contributed so much to his creations. Dan didn't show off his convictions, but he steadfastly upheld them. He was a proud Free Methodist Democrat. He openly backed Governor Pat Brown of California in 1966 and later supported candidates for presidency, Hubert Humphrey and Eugene McCarthy. In amongst the Hollywood limelight, when it would have been safer to keep quiet, Dan spoke up. He also enjoyed himself. He cherished performance vehicles, such as his 1965 Chevrolet Chevelle SS 396Z16. He was the owner of a Huffer Genie Mk10 race vehicle, known as the Vinegaroon, which participated in actual road racing competitions. The Can-Am series is one example. Dan possessed enthusiasm for speed that was equal to his greater than the life force. However, none of that might prevent the events of 1972. Dan Blocker, who was only 43, went undergoing a standard gallbladder operation at Los Angeles' Daniel Freeman Hospital. He never returned home. An unexpected blood clot and, surprisingly, made its way to his lungs. In May, he passed away from a pulmonary embolism. Birth 1972. The man who goes by Hos the Kind Giant of America, Cartwright. There was no television. Additionally, that loss wasn't limited to fans. Bonanza was forced to confront a situation that no show has ever done previously, recognize that among its, the stars had perished. The death of Hos was documented into the 14th and last season. Nevertheless, the details were never shown in their entirety. Eventually, a character in a subsequent spin-off said it. He lost his life attempting to save someone otherwise. It was the type of conclusion that matched the man. Bold, selfless. Despite being subtly heroic, Bonanza was never the same. It was a difficult season. The ratings fell. The chemistry changed. The show lost its heart without Hos. One of Dan's closest friends, Michael Landon cast members, once stated that he could, on cue, "I usually weep." He simply considered Dan. That tells you everything. Dan was interred in Dalb's Woodman Cemetery, Texas. No Hollywood, no golden statue bling. Just a simple B-marked headstone. Dan D. Blocker beside his dad, mother, as well as sister. It's easy, truthful, and just as he would have desired. The world hasn't forgotten him, though. A Dan Blocker room can be found in the Texas's O'Donnell Heritage Museum. Dan located on the California coast, Blocker Beach Malibu's coast. Dan Blocker Avenue traverses a peaceful neighborhood in Nevada, Henderson. His legacy is very actually a part of the terrain. And well, that legacy was carried on by Durk. Ahead. It was his debut appearance in a 1964 automobile ad with Dan. He was merely a child standing next to the man. Hos, as the world knew him. After that, Durk paved his own way in television. He touched down appearances as guests on programs such as Little, House the X-Files, On the Prairie, Walker, Chips, Texas Ranger, Matlock, and more. He performed from 1976 to 1978 On bare black, Lieutenant Jerry Bragsheep. Then, following decades of visitor's employment, he eventually secured another significant Brooklyn detective Hitchcock's role from 2013 through 2021. However, acting was only one aspect of Durk's story. He turned to school, obtained a degree, and even went on to teach. In 2017, he released a book for children. Master and the Little Monk is a silent, sincere tale that reflects a lot of his father's depth of passion led to the display. Now, at the age of 67, Durk Blockeris finally narrating the entire tale. Not the fan magazine, but the TV version on her, but the authentic one. The one that reveals the true nature of Dan Blocker as a parent, spouse, educator, veteran, a Hollywood anomaly, and perhaps the majority crucially, a man who never allowed success to take away his humanity. Thus, when you consider, do not merely recall Hos Cartwright the rancher on your screen. Recall the father who arrived home before bedtime tales, the warrior who remained steadfast without yelling at all, the performer who made everyone feel comfortable for a single hour each Sunday evening. Additionally, the son who continues to carry that even after all these years, tale with honor. Lastly, following decades of quiet are about to allow you to in as you are now aware of the reality.